Hello there. Welcome to Series 1, Episode 1 of Learn Synthesis with Ableton Live. I'm your host, Dr. Lawrence W. Moore. I'm a composer who specializes in electroacoustic music, and I'm a multimedia artist. Synthesis and sound design is probably at the core of what I love to do in composing my music, in customizing my own sounds or creating them from scratch. I've been teaching in higher education for over 21 years, and one of the courses that I've taught regularly were courses in synthesis and sound design. This series is focused on the art of synthesis, creating sounds in electronic music. And we will be using the software Ableton Live in order to do that. Ableton Live is a very popular digital audio workstation, and there are very powerful instruments and audio effects in Ableton Live. While the software does come with some really great preset sounds, I think, people who really get into it eventually do become hungry to develop their own sounds from scratch, or at least be able to tweak some of those presets to customize them for their own purposes and to really develop their own unique approach to sound development along with the composition of their music. This series is not genre-based. I specialize in electroacoustic music that tends to be a little bit artsy, but we will be focusing on developing different sound types that can be used in the commercial world as well. That being said, this series, in focusing on the fundamentals of synthesis, can be viewed and people who don't use Ableton Live could definitely benefit from it. But those who use Ableton Live will benefit from learning more about those instruments and audio effects. We will be beginning in this episode at square one. You don't need to have any background in synthesis or really have any background in using the instruments to design sounds in Ableton either. It'd be good if you have the software installed. If you're using a light version or an intro version, that's fine. I will be beginning with some of the core instruments that are in all of the versions of Ableton Live. So anybody will be able to start with this early point. As the overall series progresses, I may go on to some of the instruments in packs that come with the higher tiers of Ableton Live. I personally have Ableton Live 11 Suite, and I definitely can go there, and I do have Max for Live, which comes with that suite, but that's further down the road. So those of you who are already pretty knowledgeable about synthesis or Ableton Live, it'd be cool to hang around and maybe check it out later after we get over the basics. But anybody else, we're starting from square one. And in this episode, there's some things that we need to cover before we can really go in depth into the specific instruments of Ableton Live. While we will be using them, we're going to focus on sound, especially the frequency spectrum, learning some of our basic terminology. What is frequency, what is amplitude, and we'll be using the software to do that and to visualize that so you can truly understand it. We will also be looking at the harmonics, the partials, the overtones in general that make up sound, undertones, and we'll be looking at the 4 basic wave shapes. All of this knowledge is fundamental in understanding synthesis, and it applies to any software really. So in any case, I believe I've said enough here in the beginning. Oh, one more thing. This series overall will be divided up into chapters, so to speak, but I call them series. They're kind of like seasons. This is series 1. They won't be released seasonally. Basically, in series 1, I'm going to cover the material that I would normally teach within a semester, like a level 1 of synthesis and sound design. And then when I reach that point, somewhere between 12 to 16 episodes, then I'll go on to series 2, and that would be what I would teach in a level 2 of synthesis and sound design. Beyond that, we'll just explore more and more of the different instruments in the packs that you can download for Ableton, and maybe investigate other concepts. But for now, we're starting right from the basics. In this episode, I do encourage people to leave comments. If you have questions, please ask. I usually get back to them pretty quickly, within a day or two. I would like questions to be focused on what I'm covering in that episode, but since this is the first one, if you have some general questions about Ableton, or you've just installed it and you're having some trouble with it, things like that, you're welcome to ask them here in general. If you have any suggestions that would be useful for my viewers, I do take constructive suggestions and so forth. If there's some things you're excited about learning, let me know. I'll make sure I get to it at some point, but I am going to proceed in a fairly organized, methodical fashion, because there's some basics you got to learn first before you can build on that knowledge and go further. So anyway, I think by now I've given enough of a spiel. Hey, you know, I'm a professor. I tend to run at the mouth. But in any case, don't be a stranger in the comments section. Even some, you know, kind words now and then are great in this, because I like it to be something where I'm not just projecting outward information and not receiving some feedback and stuff from the audience. So I'd like this to be a little bit more of a community-based channel overall. So also, anyone interested in synthesis, please check out some of my other series. Learn Synthesis with VCV Rack, which has 3 series, 12 videos in each series so far. I've just launched another series that will be running simultaneously as this one. It's called VCV Rack Instruments and Effects. If you haven't heard of VCV Rack, it is free software for Mac, Windows, and Linux. And you can download it for free. And there's so many free modules and free libraries for it out there, because it has an open source framework where basically there's developers, wide community of developers who have developed modules for it. I mean, you could get lost in the software for ages, you know, and it's very powerful, sounds great. So you might want to check that out as well. Okay, so let's get on with the show. I don't think I should call it a show, but whatever. Okay, so here we are in the software. Just as a note, when I'm zoomed out, my mouse is hidden, and I'll hit the control key, look at the center of the screen, and you'll see like a blue highlight. But most of the time I will be zoomed in so that we could look at some of these interfaces better. So this is basically the way I've got to do it. Because when I zoom in, otherwise 2 mouse cursors appear. And the way to make it only one is when I zoom out, you don't see my cursor, so I got to highlight it. So any case, here we are in Ableton Live. I've made a MIDI track. Here, I could zoom in just a little bit. And I have a mouse pointer. So I made a MIDI track, and on that MIDI track, I put operator in Spectrum. If you want to do that yourself, the way you do it is you right click to make a MIDI track like that, MIDI track or audio track, you know, right clicking, and there are keyboard shortcuts, but I actually find it quicker to do the right click, at least for me. So under instruments is where you want to go first, and you type operator, and under instruments, you see there's operator. So you can either drag that onto your MIDI track, or you can have your MIDI track highlighted and you just double click it and it'll put operator on your MIDI track. Let's then go to audio effects right here. And then when you go up here to the search box, type in Spectrum. You'll have to open Utilities here. Yeah, Utilities was open. You don't need to open Spectrum. Just grab Spectrum here and drag it to all 3 tracks, the MIDI, audio, and audio. I am going to name these. You can click on it and just hit Control R. I'm going to call this Voice. And I'm going to call this Tones. This is how we're going to learn some concepts here. Now, I should, before beginning, say, operator is an instrument. It's something we will be focusing on later as the series progresses. It's a great way to learn FM synthesis. But for right now, there's some features on it. Like when you click on the sound wave here, you get to see what the harmonic content is being generated by operator. But basically, operator is a synthesizer. And we'll be using it now to learn some concepts about synthesis. Spectrum is a display. Well, it does more than that, but it's a display that's pretty good of the frequency spectrum. So we're going to use that to learn some concepts. So anyway, I'm just explaining why we have what we have here. And I've asked you to put those together. You don't have to. I mean, it's just, there's no way I can make you. It's just, if you learn that way by doing, it's probably a good idea. What I'm going to do is make sure my middle track here, the one that I named Voice, is armed, because I'm going to record into it. What I'm going to record now is me going, that's pretty good. I should have probably recorded that one. Any case, because I want to demonstrate something. Notice how when I go doo, and then when I go ee, I'm really singing the same note, or we would say it's the same pitch, but one sounds round and hollowish, so to speak, doo, and one sounds nasally. Ee. There's a reason why they sound different. And it's basically like if you were to play one note on a clarinet, another note on a flute, they could be playing the same pitch, but they sound like different instruments. And it has to do with their frequency spectra. The term frequency spectrum is what we're going to get into next and look at its properties. And this is how we'll do it. Let me record this wonderful singing. And I'm being sarcastic because I am not a vocalist. I just want to make sure, first of all, here. Hold on, I need to zoom in to make sure I got it right. No count in and no metronome. So, because this doesn't need timing. Okay, here we go. Making sure I'm at the beginning. Oh, actually, I can hit my. There we go. Got to count in. That was better the first time, but hey, whatever. This will still illustrate the concept. We're going to look at this in 2 different ways. First way is we're going to double click it. Please. There we go. And we see a waveform display down here. I'm going to zoom in. And in fact, we're going to use our little handy dandy zoom tool here. Grab the right end, drag it over about as far as you can. And then if you get in the middle of this little square we made, move it over, get it right about there. This is the waveform zoomed in. This is the same waveform zoomed out so we could see it over time in a more convenient way for organizing things. These fluctuations here are vibrations, and basically, like when I'm speaking, when I'm singing, basically my vocal cords are vibrating, and they're making the air molecules vibrate, and that vibration gets carried through the air molecules, just like ripples in a pond would be carried outwards from dropping a pebble in that pond. And this is called frequency, basically the rate at which something vibrates. In nature, when you generate sound and you focus it, like right now I'm speaking, and my speaking voice tends to sound, I guess, a little low, mid-rangey. I could speak a little higher like this and stuff, but you can't quite sing it. Singing is when you're focusing your vocal cords enough that they vibrate with regularity, generating a consistent frequency. Of course, I'll waver and pitch a bit because I don't sing well, but for all intents and purposes, it's a consistent frequency, and we call that pitched sound. And if you play like a note on a keyboard and sing the same note, you're actually singing a musical note. And but basically, anytime you got a specific frequency that you can hear at a consistent rate, we call that pitched sound. Not all sound is pitched. Like that is not pitched. You could say it sounds a little bit high pitched when I snap, but you can't sing that back. There's no specific frequency that's sticking out. When you produce sound, if you produce it in a way where you can generate a specific frequency that sticks out, you're creating pitched sound. When you're not, it's unpitched sound. And this varies with all sorts of ways that you generate sound. But a good way to think about it is like talking versus singing, you know? And so that's when you focus your vocal cords and you get a specific sound. Now, even though we have a specific frequency that we can see here, left to right, horizontally, this is time going forward. And these are basically like the air molecules of the sound vibrating. Of course, what it is here is a digitized picture of it, because the vibrations of the air molecules reach the diaphragm of a microphone, and the microphone converts that into voltage, and the fluctuating voltage current goes into an interface that then digitizes it by sampling it. If anybody would like me to go deeper into digital audio sampling or something like that, leave a comment, and maybe I'll make a video and just pop it in a miscellaneous playlist and stuff like that. But right now, if I get into that, we will get through all the stuff that we're talking about. But as we progress, we could probably also talk a little bit more about sampling, so you really refine how the whole concept of converting voltage current into numbers works. So anyway, here, this is our my voice as I sang. Now let me scroll over here. No, I didn't want to zoom out. Let's get it right in the middle and move over. You see how the contour of the waveform has changed a bit over here when I started singing more nasally. Basically, I was contracting my nasal cavities a little bit, the sinus cavities, and constricting the throat a little bit. And what was happening was my vocal cords were maintaining the same pitch or the same frequency that was standing out, but the shape of where those air molecules were vibrating was changing, and that produced a more nasally sound. What was really happening is some higher frequencies than what I was singing entered into the sound. And even when I was going, doo, they were there too, but quieter. But when you go, ee, you're basically generating the sound a little bit differently, changing the shape of the area where the air molecules are resonating, and you're projecting out higher frequencies. This is all part of natural sound, where when you generate sound naturally, even when you make a pitch sound that has a focused musical note that stands out, you still get other frequencies in that sound. You cannot generate a pure tone naturally or acoustically. You can synthesize one, and we'll be doing that, but you cannot generate it naturally. There'll be other frequencies in the sound. Now let's look at these frequencies a different way. Okay, so I'm going to tap over here so we get our views back. Now I'm going to rewind and play this again. Let me double click on this to get it a little bit bigger. We can zoom out on it. No, actually, no, I think this will look a little bit better here like this. All right, so rewind, play. Make sure we're... I'm looking at the wrong track. Supposed to be here. There we go. Now this is Spectrum is a frequency spectrum analyzer. It has more functions than what we're going to use it for right now, but right now I'm using it to visualize the frequency spectrum. We're going to zoom in a lot here. The left side are lower frequency, or like lower pitches. And the right side is higher frequency, higher pitches. Basically, vibrations vibrating at a faster rate. The sound wave that we were just looking at vibrating faster, and so forth. But we'll look at that again later on the sound wave view. But for now, what I want you to think about is, you notice those higher frequencies I was talking about? Well, this one here, the biggest peak, this is the note I was singing. And it looks to me right about here. I think I was pretty close to A440, but probably not exact. Since I'm not going to be recording into this with my voice again, let me get my keyboard called up, playing operator on this track. You see, let's find what note I was playing or singing, excuse me. We'll select that track again. Let's rewind, or at least find the closest thing, because I know I wasn't on pitch. It was close to a D, maybe a C sharp. So anyway, yeah, it wasn't A440 at all. But the point is, that would be vibrating somewhere around in the 300 hertz range. So let's go back to our sound wave here. Basically, those oscillations that we saw, once again, I'm trying to get this all the way zoomed in. I have some troubles with my mouse now and then. Move you over. There we go. This is basically oscillating somewhere in the 300 something hertz range, or 300 of these little waveforms. Basically, these are called cycles. When you have a crest and a trough in a waveform, it's called a cycle. So somewhere around 300 cycles per second. Spectrum could probably even tell us what it was. And in fact, let's do that. Oops. Well, spectrum's going to change here because it was registering different. It wasn't necessarily just speaking about the fundamental here. It's speaking about the frequencies in general. But basically, as you see over the course of this playing, there's the fundamental, the peak that stands out the most. And when I turn off spectrum, it kind of like fades away, and you can see a little bit of a remnant here. And then there's these other peaks here. Those are the harmonics. In general, any frequencies in a sound that are above the fundamental are called overtones. And the ones that stick out here are harmonics. You see them as smaller, meaning they have a lower amplitude, or they're less present in the sound at the beginning when I'm singing in a more hollow form, like ooh. When I'm going I'm projecting out higher frequencies, or higher, overtones are becoming louder, especially the harmonics. And we're going to talk about harmonics more specifically in just a moment, but let's just look at this over time. Yeah, these guys, well, these got bigger too, but these guys got taller. And then at the end, it kind of averages it out a bit. That's what spectrum does. But I wanted you to at least see that. Basically, over time, even though the pitch is staying the same, what we call the fundamental, the frequency, the pitch you hear is called the fundamental. And anything that's vibrating above that fundamental are called overtones. Specific kinds of overtones are either harmonics or partials. Harmonics are those overtones where they have a frequency that is a whole number multiplied by the fundamental. If this is 350 hertz or something like that, the next harmonic would be 700 hertz, 2 times the fundamental. And then the next one up will be 3 times the fundamental. 3 times 350 is 1050. And then, yeah, pretty close. 1050 would be just across this line here. I was probably singing something maybe like 330, 320, I don't know. But in any case, the fourth harmonic would be 4 times the fundamental frequency. 4 times 350 will be 1400. And so on. You can go up to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so forth. The strength of these harmonics is what gives different sounds their unique tone color, we call it. Another word for that is timbre. Basically, whether a harmonic is stronger or quieter at the different frequency it's at, is kind of like the fingerprint that makes a unique sound unique. If we were to use this spectrum to record me singing this note and then another person singing this note, they have a different shaped head, they have a different shaped chest and throat, and even if we were singing the same exact note, their voice would sound different than mine, just the same way a flute sounds different than a clarinet, and so forth. This has to do with that fingerprint. It's the harmonics in the overall overtones. Now there's another type of overtone. The other type of overtone is anything that's not one of these whole numbers times the fundamental. They're in between. And so if you find frequencies there, those are usually, I mean, they would have decimal points, and like basically a harmonic will be 2 times the fundamental, a partial will be 2.365 times the fundamental, or something like that. You can analyze them down to, however many values after the decimal point as you want. But basically, they're in between. Partials are also called non-harmonic overtones. And of course, harmonics are harmonic overtones. The big difference is because harmonics have whole number values times the fundamental. For example, a fundamental and then the second harmonic, because the fundamental is considered harmonic 1, is here, And then if you multiply that by 2, you basically have 2 cycles, crests and troughs, in the place of 1. But they line up at the beginning of that one cycle that is the first harmonic. Basically, you have 2 in place of 1. And then 3 in place of 2, in place of 1. And then 4 in place of 3, in place of 2, in place of 1. They eventually do all synchronize and line up with one another. As a result, they sound harmonious. And the partials, however, do not. They don't line up, and they sound a little less harmonious because they're kind of like the in-between cycles and so forth. The more partials in a sound, the more, shall we say, dissonance you would hear in the overall timbre, maybe a little bit more of a noise in it, depending on how the sound's produced. But in general, they are both types of overtones. And in natural sound, in acoustic sound, they just are generated naturally. They're part of nature. But depending on how that sound was produced, they're stronger or weaker and so forth based on the way the sound's produced and the resonating container for the sound, like your throat and head and chest and your voice and so forth. So in synthesis, we basically are crafting these overtones. And there are also undertones as well that can arise where the frequency slows down due to the acoustic nature of something, and they add to the color of the sound as well. But primarily in synthesis, we're crafting that. And so it's an important concept to know. Okay, I am going to mute this. I don't think we're going to go back to my voice anymore here. So let's go to the track, MIDI track with operator. Now, operator, when you call it up, it is going to, maybe the view would look a bit different depending on where you're clicked. But if you click here on the little sine wave right here, you'll get a view like this, where you have a what would be the fundamental of the note that we're going to play on the keyboard. So if I play that note, what we have is a waveform shaped like this, being played at the fundamental frequency, which is the frequency of this note. I am playing A440, and we see over here, we have A440 sticking right out. You might see different values down here, but this is A4040, believe me, because I'm playing the key A440 on the keyboard, and you see one main spike. Now, you also see a few small spikes here. These are really weak in comparison, and I think the reason why we're seeing them is operator is not generating a pure sine tone. It's generating something very close, but there are other aspects to the sound that Spectrum is picking up. But a pure sine tone would just have this one spike right here, and these would be smooth down here and down here. Okay, so that is to indicate that a sine tone shaped like this, smooth round waveform, is just one frequency. It doesn't have harmonics. These other little lines that you see here are spaces where we can add harmonics to the sine tone. And you would hear, let me play it a little bit lower. Let's go here, play A220, an octave lower. An octave lower is always half the frequency, and an octave higher is always double the frequency. Let me play A220. And I just painted in some higher frequencies there. These are all harmonics because all these are slots where you can put frequencies at whole numbers times the fundamental frequency. And you hear how that sounded kind of pleasant at first when I painted them in. That's because they're harmonics. They tend to be harmonious. So this is sounding quite different now than when we just go up here to sine. There we go. Operator, we're going to be looking at operator in more detail later. Right now I'm using it to illustrate concepts, but it has other types of sines here to model like 4-bit and 8-bit systems. But now let's look at how that, well, I guess we can visualize it right here. I was going to record it in, but I don't know that we need to do that. Because right here, you just imagine this shape repeating over and over. Smooth, round shape with a crest and a trough. The cycles are smooth and sinusoidal. They tend to sound very kind of bland because they're only one frequency vibrating. There's no additional harmonics that are there to color the sound. Now we're going to look at basically the opposite. The sine wave is one of the 4 basic wave shapes. And we're going to look at another one now called the saw. We're going to pick saw 64. Now what the 64 stands for is like these numbers here, 16, 32, 64. How many harmonics do you want? You know, the second one to the left, the second one from the left would be 2, harmonic number 2, so that's 2 times the fundamental. If I play A440, this would be 880 hertz. 3 times the fundamental will be 1320 hertz, and so forth. 64 would be up here. That would be 64 times 440. Yeah, so whiz-bang can calculate it right now, but I'm not going to. You know, just, you know, you can work it out. It's a high frequency, though. And that tends to make a sawtooth shape like this. Each of these harmonics is a sine wave being generated, you know, the smooth, round wave shape. Each one of these harmonics will be one of those, and the height is basically saying how strong they are. Although this is a little bit deceptive in that for a sawtooth, the second harmonic would have a strength that is proportional to the first harmonic, which is the fundamental, of 1 over the harmonic number. And in that case, it being the second harmonic, that would be 1 over 2, which is 1/2, or 0.5. So basically, the 440 that is the fundamental in relationship to the 880 that is harmonic 2, the fundamental is called harmonic 1. It is technically a harmonic itself, but harmonic 2 is the first harmonic overtone because it's over the fundamental. But anyway, that will be 880 hertz at half, 1 over 2, the strength. The third harmonic will be 1 over 3, the strength. The fourth will be 1 over 4. And on up, the same thing. It's basically 1 over the harmonic number. And if you emit sine waves at those strengths, you get a sawtooth wave that looks like this. Now, the reason why this doesn't look half the height as this harmonic here is they seem to have a visual adjustment going on here. This would not be a linear graph. It's more of like a exponential or inverse exponential. Why? Because by the time you get into these higher harmonics, they would be so short you wouldn't see them, and it would be visually difficult for you to do paintings of you know, harmonic strengths and things like that. But trust me, that's the way it is. It's 1 over the harmonic number is the strength that the different sine waves here would have to be in order to generate a sawtooth wave. Now let me show you. As you see, there's multiple saws here. If we want a sawtooth wave that only has 3 harmonics, we can select that, and then we have just 3 sine tones making up the whole harmonic spectrum. You see, sine tones in synthesis are kind of like our building blocks. They're the atoms, if you will, that combine to form the frequency spectrum of a sound. And so if we have 3 sine tones, one of them is 440, if we're playing a 440, and it sounds like that. I should play the other sawtooth so we can compare too. But that in a moment. So anyway, full strength on the 440, the 880, which is here, will be 1 over the harmonic number. That's 1/2. And then the third one here will be 1/3 the strength of the fundamental. And that will be at 3 times 440 or 1,320 hertz. Just including those. So let's compare them. Let's go to sine. Okay, not as bright. Let's do the sine with 3 harmonics. I mean the saw with 3 harmonics, which really isn't a saw. You see how it's kind of like a hybrid bumpy sine sort of thing here? That's the point. You haven't added enough harmonics for it to get more of that sawtooth diagonal line sort of shape. Let's add, yeah, let's do 10. Now, as you see, the diagram shows it's closer to a sawtooth shape. These are just images to show you roughly how the waveform would look. We would have to record them in, zoom in on the waveform, and look at them to see them, to really analyze them. And probably we could do that. Let me do this, though, first. You hear how it's getting brighter now? Because we're adding more higher frequency content, more harmonics to the sound. Now let's go to the Saw 64 with a full comp. What did I do there? What did I do? I must have just bumped up here in the timeline and got out of it. Okay. I don't edit things. I'm raw, baby. I keep it real. Okay. So let's put Saw 64. And now, if you're listening with headphones, you can definitely hear the difference. If you're listening just using the built-in speaker on your cell phone, it's not going to give you enough of a true comparison here, because we're talking about some frequencies that maybe that speaker doesn't even carry. And since it's such a small speaker, it's harder to perceive. If you are using a laptop or a cell phone, if you plug in headphones, you'll be able to rewind and hear these comparisons much better, much more clearly. Okay, so how about we talk about a couple other shapes, and then we'll record them in and zoom in and look at them. Let's go here to square. Now the numbers once again mean how many harmonics are included. So I'm just going to go to the full 64 because that's the closest thing to a true square wave, which looks like this. Crest and a trough that are both square. Now the square wave has its own formula, just like the sawtooth would be frequencies, whole numbers times the fundamental, and it includes all of them. It's harmonic 2, harmonic 3, harmonic 4, harmonic 5, and each of those harmonics is at the proportional strength to the fundamental of 1 over the harmonic number. Now you see there's gaps here. The square wave has the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th, all the even numbered harmonics taken out. It's only the odd harmonics. And those odd harmonics are 1 over the harmonic number squared. Not squared, that's the triangle wave, excuse me. They're 1 over the harmonic number, just like the sawtooth, but it takes the even ones out. So we get less harmonic overtone material, we get less higher frequency content, and it sounds like this. We're going to record these in back to back so we can make an even better comparison then. But anyway, it would have basically less harmonic content than a sawtooth because the even numbered harmonics are taken out. Here's a triangle. Now here they're only including a few of the overtones. And that's because they get real quiet real quick. A triangle wave also only has the odd number harmonics. And the strength is 1 over that harmonic number squared. So harmonic 3, because it's the next harmonic up from the fundamental, would be 1 over 3 squared, or 1 over 9. That's much quieter than 1 over 3, because 1 over 9, 1/9, is a smaller value than 1/3. And then when we get to 1 over 5, that's 1 over 5 squared, so that's 1/25. Much quieter. And I guess that's why they only bother, we'll only include a few, because after that you're not really hearing too much of anything. And it sounds like that. It sounds like a sine wave with a little bit of lipstick on, you know? Okay. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to record. I'm trying to think about a good way of doing this. Okay. We're going to listen to the 4 basic wave shapes. So we're going to do sine, square, triangle, sawtooth. Okay, but what I'm going to do first of all is just play 4 notes. I'm going to record 4 notes in, because this is a MIDI track, and I can change the waveform that operator's putting out later. So let's just do this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, rewind. We're going to unrecord enable that, and we're going to record enable the second of the audio tracks that I named tones. And we're going to put the output of the MIDI track into tones so that we can record this track into it. Here we go. Now let's start with the sine wave. We're going to go in order of harmonic strength. So I need to go back over here, select sine, rewind. Now we are record enabled here, right? All right, good. Now we may not hear it while we're recording it unless we should. Yeah. It looks like its input is set to something else. Yeah, that is a good point. We're coming in external in. Let's change that to operator. Now, operator's not going to play unless I monitor it for right now. Well, we play it back later. We don't have to, but I'm going to. There we go. I see the signals going through, so we're going to be fine. Good. All right. So let's record this in. We're on sine tone. We're recording it in there. You know what I should have just done? All right. Since I'm not hearing it. Yeah, this is great. Let's go right here. I'm going to shorten this so that so we're not overlapping. Hold on, I'm going to pause and do this so you don't have to see me working with it. Okay, we're back. I recorded that in. Actually, the quickest way of doing it would have been, if you want to do it yourself, is duplicate this track 3 times and go into it and change the wave shape on operator for each one. The first one I have here is sine, then I have triangle, then I have square, then I have saw. And so we're going to hear them, and then we're going to zoom in here and look at them. Okay, so now let's zoom in here and shrink them down. I'm sorry, my mouse clicker has been fighting me lately in all sorts of software. Sorry about that. All right. Maybe I should have played a lower frequency so we could see the contours better. But anyway, that is your sinusoidal shape. And here we have a more of a triangular shape. Unfortunately, we cannot get zoomed in enough to see it so clearly. And then here is a square wave shape. You can kind of see a bit of squareness on the upper portions of the crests there. And then over here is the sawtooth, which you can see pretty clear. So you can see, you know, the sine, triangle, square, and saw. It's just, if I zoom in a lot, there you go. You see it's like a diagonal line going down. And in operator, I use saw 64, square 64. There you go. Got a little bit of an edge up on it, though. It's not a complete flat top square. And over here is a triangle wave. And of course, from this zoom, it looks similar to the sine wave, but they are similar in timbre. Remember, the triangle wave in operator only has 3 harmonics in it. So there we go. So fundamentally speaking, the main thing to take away from this is what the frequency spectrum is. You know, sound is all these different vibrations of air molecules that our ears sense. Basically, as our eardrums vibrate with the vibration of the air molecules around us. And then in naturally produced sound, basically when you make a pitched sound where you even hear like a musical note that's sticking out there, there are other frequencies in the sound. And sculpting those frequencies is what we do in synthesis, in designing different sounds. There are also undertones in nature as well, and I didn't emphasize that so much here because largely in synthesis we work with overtones, but you can work with undertones too. I even have a synthesizer behind me there that's a Moog subharmonicon where you actually generate subharmonics, which are below the fundamental. But we're going to work with the basic stuff first, and in crafting sound. As we go, we'll be starting with the core instruments that should be in intro and light versions of Ableton Live. And we're going to start with those modules that allow me to demonstrate the core concept. So we'll be looking at our first module next time. It's a module called Analog, and it's a great way to start. We'll be coming back to operator and looking at it in more detail later, because it will allow us to perform FM synthesis using one of those basic instruments that comes in like even the lower tiers of Ableton. So people that have intro or a light version of Ableton will be able to work with operator as well as analog. But analog is a great way to get the first launch into starting to craft sound. So next time we're going to start making sound. And now that you have these fundamental concepts down, hopefully when we're crafting sound, you'll be able to hear and visualize and put all these things together into understanding it as an overall concept. So anyway, thank you for joining me. If you found this useful or helpful at all, please hit that like button and leave a comment. It helps the videos get distributed on YouTube and I reach a wider audience. Well, until then, take care and stay free.